I am a person who the journey is not the destination. And I recognize that sometimes I have to work through that on myself. But when I'm trying to get somewhere, my purpose is to get there. So the journey is not the destination. I go somewhere for the purpose of being in that particular place, whether we're talking about vacation or meeting or anything in between. That the journey is not the destination. But I have found that time can be the enemy of peace. And peace is one of the fruit of the Spirit. It's the fifth one that we're going to talk about. And we've talked about 4 others. I can do math. 5 minus 1 is 4. But and I have them there on the screen, some of the definitions, just so you can continue to reference them as we go through this. And we talked about kindness, which is only helps. And it's also associated with the word easy. So in Matthew chapter 11, when Jesus says, "My yoke is easy," he's using this same word that Paul uses in Galatians 5 for kindness. And we find that Jesus is for us and not against us. Then we looked at goodness, and goodness has a context of rebuke and correction and discipline with it as well. In John chapter 2, Jesus turns the tables over in the temple because goodness does not tolerate badness. We looked at the concept of love from the Greek word agape, which is unconquerable benevolence. That we want the best for the other person regardless of who they are. Even if they are our enemies, we want the best for them because we love them as Jesus loves us. And I believe that if I love God, I love others. If I don't love others, I don't love God. Then last week we looked at the word joy. And joy has its basis in religion. And we talked about a few things that joy isn't. Joy is not circumstantial. Joy is not synonymous with happiness. We talked about how joy is not the absence of sorrow, because our joy is in the salvation that Jesus provides. That is where we get joy. And so today we're going to talk about peace, which is the Greek word eirene. Now, it's spelled E-I-R-E-N-E. But I have a terrible time with pronunciation. So I literally have the word I, then the word rain, and then the letter A to make sure I can pronounce it correctly. I'm hooked on phonics apparently. But peace, in this context of this Greek word, it has several different connotations. But part of it is that it's peace that comes with the serenity of enjoying being under a just ruler or a just leader, somebody that you trust, that they have a high sense of competency, but they also have a good morality. They're going to do a good job, both in the sense of from the outcome standpoint, but also in taking care of their people. Now this Greek word eirene is also, it's kind of it's the Greek word for the Hebrew word shalom. It's not exactly always the same, but in the sense that it's this peace that's not just about what we trust the individual. It's the peace that becomes from who God is, and it's not just freedom from trouble. We're trusting in God and His rule and His reign, and it gives us peace. Now we can think of the leaders that we have followed, particularly, our political system is not set up for us to really like our politicians, right? Both sides fight and claw to see who can win, and so we see all the dirt on everybody. But the peace that God provides is a peace that we trust that this person is all good in the sense of morally good, but also good in the sense of they do everything well. So we have peace in who this God is. Now, peace is not the absence of conflict. And we have to make sure we recognize, in the same sense that joy is not the absence of sorrow or something like that, that there's a heavenly peace that we get. We have peace because of who God is, not because of our circumstances. In the same way, we have joy because of the salvation that God gives, not because of our circumstances. And so we have peace because we trust in the one we serve. But as I said, time can be the enemy of peace. And Maybe it was today, maybe it was a different time, but I'm confident that there's been a time in your life where you have woken up late. Maybe your alarm didn't go off. Maybe you didn't set the alarm. Maybe you hit the snooze button. Maybe you turned off your alarm and fell back asleep. But you woke up late. And when we wake up late, we rush and we're frazzled. Now, some of you might be perpetually late people. And so for you, well, rushing is not the enemy of peace because I'm always rushing and I've figured out how to have peace in that circumstance. But if you could take a step back for a moment and say, what does it look like to rush and how does that get in the way of my peace? Because I've not figured out a way to have peace and rush at the same time. Now the Apostle Paul ties our peace with who God is and how Jesus comes to us and restores us. In Galatians chapter 5 is where he shares the fruit of the Spirit, and peace is one of those. But in Romans chapter 5, he shares about essentially salvation. And he's going through this long argument of what God is doing through Jesus, what God's purpose was, and how God is reconciling us to him, and what that looks like. And so we come to Romans chapter 5, and we start with verse 1. The Apostle Paul says, "Since we have been made right with God by faith, we have peace because of what Jesus Christ has done for us. Because of our faith, Christ has brought us to this place of undeserved privilege, and we look forward to sharing God's glory." So justification is one of the words that is happening here, one of the theological words that is happening. Essentially what it means is that the price has been paid, that we are made right before God. Now we recognize, or at least we would say, that we can't earn our salvation. There's nothing that you can do, nothing that I can do, that would earn my salvation. I cannot do that, but through Jesus, we are restored to God. And through Jesus, we can be made with a right relationship with God, because Jesus removes guilt. But when we look at the world, we can see that our circumstances and life bring uncertainty. In certain situations, we see that life just brings uncertainty. But when we get to Jesus and we think about the peace that he provides, we recognize that Jesus can bring tranquility. Now, but this peace is not the absence of conflict. It's not the absence of trouble. So when I say that Jesus brings peace or tranquility or those types of things, it's not necessarily that Jesus is making the world calm. Just like joy, peace is not circumstantial. Peace is not dependent upon the things around you. See, peace is that everything is right through Jesus. And peace is only something that Jesus can accomplish. And so when we look at these concepts of peace and joy, we see how they are connected to the atonement, through the salvation that Jesus provides. Now, on some level, we could say all the fruit are connected to that. Well, love is connected because Jesus came because he loved us, and we see the atonement wrapped up in that. But both of these two, joy and peace, are intensely tied to salvation, that we are made right with God. We can have joy and peace because of that. And so no matter the uncertainty that life brings, Jesus can bring tranquility. He can bring the peace that we are longing to have. But I love the word that the Apostle Paul uses when he says privilege, that we have been brought to this undeserved place of privilege. You know, sometimes we talk about, whether we're talking about the worship service or some type of thing, of how it's a privilege to be here, a privilege to be in God's presence, a privilege to serve Jesus, and those types of things. And sometimes I think we talk so much, well, it is a privilege, that word just doesn't become as meaningful as it used to. See, it is a privilege to be here. It is a privilege that we can serve Jesus. And I hope we never allow that to just be common. I hope we never allow that to be something that's no big deal. Because this privilege that Jesus provides for us brings peace. And it's peace that only Jesus can bring. Now, the peace that Jesus brings is not just about past events. And by that, I mean, sometimes we can talk about salvation as, well, I gave my life to Jesus 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, however long ago, and then we kind of coasted the rest of the way. Well, peace is not something that you received way back then. It's something you receive every day. We have to continue to receive this peace. The salvation that Jesus gives us is not something that we just decided so many years ago and now we're doing whatever. It's we're living in that salvation now and we're living in that peace now. See, when we've received this peace or salvation or whatever we're talking about with Jesus, and he calls us to go out and share it. And so in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, Jesus is sharing the Beatitudes, and he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." And as I think about this, Jesus gives us peace. Jesus restores us to God. He brings us to this undeserved place of privilege. But is there peace in the church? I think it's important that we take a step back to say, are we really living in peace? Or are we just trying to figure out how to coexist without really figuring it out? What does peace look like? But again, rushing can squash our peace. Time is sometimes the enemy of peace. See, if you wake up late, or you're late for an appointment, or late for something, most of the times what happens is your routine has to be adjusted. Some of you are not routine oriented, but for the most part, everybody has some type of routine. Every morning, I hope you brush your teeth, right? Whether you brush it at this time, that time, or whatever, whether you put your socks on before you brush your teeth, whatever. But the reality is we have some type of routine that when we rush, that routine gets altered or adjusted. Maybe you're late and so you have to skip certain things. Maybe you can't eat your breakfast that morning. Or maybe on your way to work you don't have time to stop for your coffee, your morning drink. And so when our routine is adjusted, the rest of our day can kind of seem off whack. It can seem different. And it causes anxiety, it causes frustration. We just feel a little off because we're rushing. Now life happens. I recognize sometimes life happens and we adjust and we can be flexible. But when time becomes an issue, oftentimes peace gets pushed out. But the Apostle Paul continues in verse 3. He says, "We can rejoice when we run into problems and trials, for we know they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops character. And character strengthens our hope in salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment, for we know how much God loves us, because he has given us his Holy Spirit to fill us with his love." And so just like with joy, we come back to this concept of trials. And how do trials exist when we talk about peace or joy? Now, I read this last week, but James chapter 1, verse 2 says, "Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds." We don't like those verses. It's not comfortable, right? We live in America. We try to figure out problems to get rid of trials. We try to figure out things so we don't have these issues, these obstacles, these inconveniences in our life. We try to get rid of them all. Now, enduring trials or sufferings or problems are not good just in and of themselves, but the Apostle Paul tells us that they can be good. They can be beneficial. Because when we recognize peace is not necessarily the absence of conflict, then we recognize that a trial is not necessarily in conflict with peace. We can have peace in the midst of this trial. Because peace is not about just relaxation. It's not about quiet contemplation. It's not about just taking a good nap. Now, peace a lot of times brings those. Calmness often is a result from experiencing peace. But really, peace shows that we have this trust in our Savior. It shows that we have the mind of Jesus. So even in the midst of all the life's uncertainties that we experience, we can have this peace, this tranquility that Jesus wants to give us. Because even if we don't like it, I think in principle we can agree that trials, difficulties, conflict, they can strengthen us, that we can get something from them. See, peace is not indifference to our circumstances. It's not always being happy-go-lucky in every circumstance or being overly optimistic. Peace just says, I trust Jesus. I have settled my trust in Jesus. I have confidently placed my trust in who Jesus is, and I am following him and serving him. So even though the world around me is crumbling, I can have peace because of who Jesus is. Because peace is not dependent upon my circumstances. See, it's something the Holy Spirit's going to give me. It's the fruit of the Holy Spirit. And it's not dependent upon what's happening around me. Now, peace cares about what's right. Peace cares about right and wrong and all those types of things, but it does not get caught up in worldly struggles. As the mission trip team was up here sharing about their trip down to Cactus, Texas, I do want to mention I had the director of the Compassionate Ministry Center on the podcast this last Friday, and Phil Anderson. And he was talking that they're up to 30 different countries represented in that town of 3,100 people at any given time. And one of the things that they do at the Compassion Ministry Center is help people with their immigration status or their refugee status. And as we were talking in the conversation, he said, there's a lot of political noise out there about what's happening. And he said, what? Our system is broken. Everybody knows it. But there are still real people involved. And so I think peace says, what? Our system is broken. But I see this person hurting, and I'm going to care for this person. But you know what? That applies to everything, right? We can think of the LGBTQ situation or conversation that's happening of, we can have political stances, but there are real people involved. And peace says, peace can say, I believe this, but I care for you. And when you think of the fruit, right? Think of the other fruit. Love says, I want unconquerable benevolence for you. Kindness only helps. Now, goodness has a sense of rebuke, but if we rush to goodness and rebuke others too quickly, then all the other fruit aren't going to be displayed. So when we see how they work together, we say, this makes sense. See, if I just have the truth and I'm on a crusade for the truth, I'm going to just push people away. If I just have kindness and just show no care for what is truth, then there's no standard that's going to be set. But Jesus says all these work together. And when we have peace, we can see what the truth is, but care for the individual. Because we trust Jesus. Because you know what? I can't change anybody. I can't heal anybody. I can't transform anybody. But I can show them what Jesus has done for me. Right? And that is a big difference and change. And when we live in trust of Jesus, we can have peace with that, knowing that some people might take advantage of us. Knowing that some people are going to reject us. Some people might be mean to us. But if I live Jesus, I can have peace with whatever the circumstance is, whatever the situation is, whatever the outcome is, because of who Jesus is. Because you know what? I love how Apostle Paul says it. Says, this hope in Jesus is never going to disappoint. And there may be some people that you've talked to, I've talked to people who said, I've been hurt by the church, or hurt by this or that. But you know what? Jesus has never hurt anybody. Somebody may think that they were hurt by Jesus, but they were really hurt probably by a sinful person. When I say sinful person, I'm a sinful person. You're a sinful person. Sometimes we accidentally hurt people and don't mean to. Sometimes we probably do it intentionally, and I hope we repent of that and change. But the reality is Jesus does not disappoint. People have been hurt by the institution. They have left because of formalized religion. They've left because people who are trying to follow Jesus, who are still imperfect, as we all are, do things that bring hurt. But nobody's hurt by Jesus. And so we can think of the peace that we're called to give, the peace that we're called to receive and give. We recognize that Jesus changes things. He's changed it for me, and I can extend that to others. But I think Matthew chapter 7, verse 5 is a verse we always need to make sure we remember. As Jesus tells us, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will clearly see to remove the speck from your brother's eye. See, we've got to make sure we're right with Jesus before we start judging others. Right? And we recognize that. We're real good at saying that. I think that might have got the loudest amen today. But the reality is it's hard Because we want to rush to correcting others. Because when we correct others, we feel better about ourselves. We hide our own faults and our own flaws. But peace says, you know what? Somebody might not be doing what they're supposed to do. Somebody might be taking advantage of me or the system or something like that, but I'm trusting Jesus. It may not be right what they're doing, and when we put all the other fruit, we can deal with those situations. I'm not trying to be indifferent to when people are doing things that are shady or sinful, but we're talking about peace today. And peace does not get caught up in the worldly affairs. It gets caught up in how I can care for the individual. Because what Paul is talking about here is we are being reconciled to God through Jesus. We are made right with God, and our peace derives from that. That is the only thing that brings actual peace to our life. Because other types of peace is absence of conflict, which you read the newspaper. I don't know. Does anybody get the newspaper? I know several people do. I don't, so sorry. But we look at the news and we see there's conflict everywhere. There are things that are happening. There's sinful stuff. There's evil happening in this world. But one of the things that Paul does in his letters is he uses this phrase, grace and peace. That grace and peace be with you. And as I was thinking about how Paul gives that as an encouragement, I think the first thing is we receive the grace of God, and then we receive the peace of God. We're not going to get the peace of God without the grace of God. He gives us His grace. He gives us His salvation. He gives us His freedom. He offers His grace, and when we receive His grace, then His peace will come from it. Because no matter what, no matter who you are, no matter how awesome you are, life at some point will bring uncertainty. But through Jesus, we can have tranquility. Through Jesus, we can have peace. Through Jesus, everything can be made right. But sometimes things get in the way of our peace. So we wake up late one morning. We're rushing. And we're trying to get to our appointment, to work, whatever that is. And we get in the car and we recognize, I need to stop for gas before I get there. And so we have a choice to make of, I either risk it and try to get to work as quickly as possible without stopping for gas, or and run the risk of running out of gas, or I stop for gas and I'm even more late for work. See, when time is an issue, it's hard to have peace in those moments. When we're rushing through life, whether it's a circumstance that we can control or not, whether it's purposeful or accidental, when we rush through life, peace seems to get squeezed out. Peace is something that we push out when we allow time to be a factor. But Jesus knows our time. And when we were utterly helpless, Jesus came at just the right time to die for us sinners. Now, as Apostle Paul continues, most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, though some might be willing to die for a person who's especially good. He says, but God showed His great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. And since we have been made right with God by Christ, He will certainly save us from condemnation. For since our friendship with God has been restored by the death of His Son while we were still sinners, He will certainly save us through the life of His Son. So now we rejoice in this wonderful new relationship with God because of Christ Jesus, who has made us friends with God. Again, can't save ourselves. I can't save myself. You can't save yourself. Nobody can save themselves. Only Jesus can save. But when we experience the salvation that Jesus provides, we are made right with God. We are restored. We are reconciled. We are healed. But one of the things that happens from this is that Jesus then goes us to be people who share healing, to share restoration, to share reconciliation. But I wonder if one of our default modes in the church is that when we experience conflict, is just to avoid it. Well, let's pretend it doesn't exist. Let's see if it will go away. Now, I'm not saying we need to be on a crusade and going after every minor issue and whatnot. We can disagree on certain things. Some of you know about my culinary preferences and have expressed that you really like oatmeal raisin cookies. Whatever, right? Right? I'm at peace with the fact that you like oatmeal raisin cookies and I don't, all right? But the reality is, just because we avoid the conflict doesn't mean we're actually following Jesus, because Jesus heals, he restores, he reconciles. And I believe Jesus wants to give us his peace, and then he calls us to be people who pursue peace. He calls us to be peacemakers. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And so what happens is we're kind of getting combination here of the heavenly peace that Jesus provides and the worldly peace in which he calls us to seek. Because one of the things that's happening is N.T. Wright, the scholar N.T. Wright, commonly says the church stand at the intersection between heaven and earth. So there are some ways where Jesus calls his followers to be people who are living on earth with the reality of heaven. So we don't have to wait to heaven in order to make everything right. We don't have to wait to heaven in order to find healing and reconciliation with each other. And so we see what Jesus does, his work on the cross is on some levels it's vertical. It's between God and us. God makes us right, up and down. God is above, we are below. But he also calls us to do horizontal peacemaking, make things right between me and you. Because Jesus makes it possible for us to be in right relationship with God, which in turn makes it possible for us to have right relationship with each other. Right? We don't stop just, well, I'm right with God and that's it. God makes us right with himself through Jesus, and then he calls us to be pursuers of peace in our world now. Now sometimes, in order to follow Jesus effectively, he calls us to take risks that might bring hurt back into our life. If you pursue peace with somebody else, there's a chance they could spit in your face. There's a chance they could mock you. There's a chance they could use your words to show how you're weak. There's a chance they could do that. But Jesus calls us to do it anyway. He calls us to seek peace, not worry about these worldly situations. Because if someone makes fun of us, that's not right. But that's a worldly hurt. But when we have healing and restoration and reconciliation, that's a heavenly reward. So we see there's a difference there. So the hurt we can experience is because of our sinful nature here on earth. But when we experience the healing that Jesus provides, we enter into this realm of the intersection between heaven and earth. And we experience the heaven that Jesus wants us to have now. But if we experience hurt, we come back to James chapter 1. We rejoice when we face many trials, right? We can do that because through these trials, we can develop endurance and character because we have this hope in Jesus. And it all comes back to the fact that we have peace because we trust Jesus. We trust in his competency. We trust in his goodness, both as a competency and morality. We trust that he has our best interests in mind. See, Jesus gave his life for us. He died for us while we were still sinners. It says people don't do that for each other. Now, there may be occasions where somebody does it for an especially good person or a close friend or family or something of that nature. But in general, people don't do that. But Jesus did it for people who were enemies of God, which is all of us. We're all sinners. We're all people who were not right with God, but Jesus came for us knowing that we might reject him, knowing that we might mock him, knowing that we might spit in his face. He came anyway and did that for us. Now, peace recognizes that we have disputes, that we have conflicts, that we have differences. Peace recognizes that we won't always agree. So the point of peace is not to all have the same opinion. It's to accept one another. Now, again, we have the issue of, well, what if someone's doing things that are inappropriate? Well, we have other fruit that helps deal with that. And on some levels, we have to let God do his job for him. Right? It's not my job to clean people. It's not my job to transform people. It's God's job to do that. Now, we have accountability, and we have all those types of things. And so make sure we keep all these things in tension. But Paul tells us not to conform to others. And in Romans chapter 12, he says, don't conform to the patterns of this world. Instead, be conformed to Jesus. See, when we talk about the behaviors of others, what happens is we get our mind off of ourselves and we focus on others instead of the work that Jesus calls us to do in our own lives. So we got to focus on ourselves. We got to make sure that we are right with Jesus. We got to make sure that we are doing what Jesus has called us to do. Now, on some level, we have to treat each other with tact, with kindness, with empathy, and we have to make sure we do so in a way that shows the other person that we care. Unfortunately, people take advantage of that. I don't want to downplay that. But on the same level, if we're worried about people taking advantage of us, then we're taking our focus off of Jesus. We're missing some of the point. One of the things I love about our clothing ministry, Shared Blessings, is the fact of we don't ask questions. If you need clothes, here's some clothes. Are there people that take advantage of it? Probably. But I'm telling you what, the overwhelming blessing that we're able to give far outweighs any of the risks that we're taking. But what if we lived that way as people? What if we interacted that way with each other? That somebody may take advantage of me, but the overwhelming blessing is greater than the risk. What if we do that with our coworkers or our neighbors? Because Jesus is calling us to live in peace, not just in the sense of, well, with your close friends and family who are followers of Jesus, not with your church family, not just with people that you like. He calls us to live in peace with everyone because we trust Jesus. And peace is not about our circumstances. It's not about our worldly worth. It's not about what we have on this world. It's what we have through Jesus. Because Jesus makes us right with God. And through Jesus, we are made friends of God. We are no longer enemies. Now, if you look in the Bible, the first 2 chapters of the Bible are about how the world was before sin. And how God created and how beautiful and how good it was. The last 2 chapters of the Bible are what the world's going to look like after God has completed his plan of redemption. And how it's going to be awesome, how it's going to be fantastic, how it's going to be streets of gold and all that kind of stuff. Everything else in between is God's plan of redemption for his creation. It's God seeking us. It's God coming to us. It's God revealing himself to us because we are enemies of God, but God is restoring us to him. That's what God is doing. Through Jesus, he makes it so we can have peace with him. You know what? We don't deserve that. We don't deserve to be at peace with God. In the same way that there's people that probably don't deserve to be at peace with you. But Jesus calls us to extend peace. He calls us to be people that pursue peace, that we have received the peace of Jesus and we call to give it to others. And I'm more and more convinced that this concept of peace and joy, these 2 fruit, work closely together. They're not circumstantial. They're not about worldly issues. That we can have peace in the midst of conflict in the same way that we can have joy in the midst of sorrow. But we have to be careful that time doesn't get in the way. And maybe there are other things that get in the way of peace that are more important to you. And we can talk about those different times, but I think time is a real issue. In the 1960s, the Senate did a study, created a committee to do a study on what the future was going to look like. And the report back to the Senate committee was that it estimated that by 1985, I wasn't even born yet, in 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, 1985, for 27 weeks a year and retire at 38. You know what their biggest concern in the report was? That people were going to be bored. Now, we know that didn't happen. Right? Now they estimate that the average husband and wife work about 100 hours a week. People are not underburdened. People are overburdened. And our issue with time, our issue with having all these responsibilities, most of which are probably good, is that they push peace out. Now, if we were to be asked, we would probably affirm that peace doesn't necessarily come with a bigger bank account. Peace is not about having more stuff. It's not about having more things, more prestige. Peace comes from Jesus, because through Jesus we have been made right with God. Peace comes because we trust Jesus. We trust that he is both good in the competent sense and good in a moral sense. We trust that he is leading with our best intention in mind. He is going to take care of us, because this hope of salvation that is Jesus will never disappoint. Our world might be crumbling. Our world might be falling apart, but we can still have peace. Because no matter the uncertainty that life brings, Jesus can bring tranquility. He can bring peace. But there are so many situations that try to take away our peace. We can think of our family situations. We can think of our financial situations. We can think of our health situations. Maybe you have loved ones that are causing you to lose peace. Whatever it is, Jesus wants to give you peace. And sometimes he will change those situations to give us peace. But other times he will just give us his peace to say, I've got this. And we trust him. And that is where our peace comes.